Hey everyone, Joe Carroll here, and I'm really excited to be with you guys today. I mean, like really excited, because as you just heard, we are going to talk about our recreation of the incredible Fleetwood Mac song, The Chain. It's a favorite probably for a lot of us. We all love that song. Who doesn't love that song? But I had some great studio friends, as you saw, come out and replay the instrument parts. And I had some other really great friends of mine, a husband and wife duo called Blue Honey here in Nashville that came out and did the vocals. So, and they crush it. They absolutely nailed it. So we had a great time. The other thing I'm really excited about is that following this segment, Marc Daniel Nelson is going to start his breakdown of what he did to mix it. Quickly, let's talk about what we had going on in here. The kick and the snare, we had the SSL 4000 Revival. And you will see that there's just a little bit of compression and a substantial amount of EQ. You know how kick and snare is, even with fantastic mics and fantastic tuning, they need a little bit of what they need, right? So we have that going on here. You'll see I selected black knob. The snare bottom actually was over here on the 9000 though. In fact, let's just stay over here since we're over here. On the 9000 recreations, I have the overheads, and I have the snare bottom, and I have the electric guitar number 2. You'll see that I was using just a little bit of EQ on the overheads, adding just a little bit of top end, a little bit of compression, kind of soft ratio, probably in the 2 to 3 to 1 ratio, just flickering the lights just a little bit on the fast attack setting, a little bit of fast attack compression on the snare bottom, and a little bit of EQ as well. Right under that, I have more Revival 4000s. I use that on the main electric guitar that you hear, on both of them, like the main rhythm pass through the body of the song, as well as the electric solos at the end are going through a 4000 circuit to take advantage of that transformer. The bass was also going through the 4K with just a little bit of EQ. As you can see, I was ducking just a tiny bit of 200 here and adding just a bit of what looks like probably around 2K. Let's go up here to the top. We have the Harrison 32C on tom 1 and 2, and you can see pretty heavy EQ. And the reason that the EQ is so heavy is because the Harrison, it's a recreation of a vintage circuit. And some of you guys that's been around for a handful of years, or have been lucky enough to acquire vintage EQ circuits, you know that a lot of them are very soft. So, which is really cool, right? So it's unlike, some devices where you turn a little bit at like 3 dB of 10K and it's really, really audible, and that's plenty. This is kind of more like crank it and just, because it just sounds good. It's a really sweet musical EQ. So it's just made to be really used, and I love doing that. And then I also used the acoustic guitar part that you hear, recreating Lindsay's, iconic kind of thing. That was also the 32C. It's pretty flat, actually. There's just a little bit of around 200 being reduced, just, that close mic thing. And again, just to let you hear, usually I would cut it flat, but just to kind of let you hear, just a little bit of that circuit, aside from the preamplifier, of course. And then one more piece here, I have the solid state Octo, and that's they make this in a quad, right, as well. So you can get it in a 4-channel or an 8-channel. And this is basically the same preamp that would have came in like a Duality console or a Origin console, with varying degrees of drive, harmonic distortion that you can put in the signal path. If you hold the button down, you see it turns green. So, but I was using I was using no drive on the room mics because those were ribbons that already had a lot of color. But you'll see on the hat and the ride and the keyboards and the grand piano that we were recording that day, all were using, and the B3, because the B3 was coming up in this. We just kind of moved the inputs from the live room to be between the keys and the B3. But that is the entirety of what we used preamplifier EQ wise. But now let's talk about the microphones. Number 1 on Troy, I had the H251. This is a Heiserman microphone. Now this is a super accurate recreation of the vintage Telefunken 251 that's so esteemed and so loved, and it sounds freaking amazing, as you will hear. Real quickly, I can talk about a couple specs. They make their own capsules. In fact, there's other companies that buy capsules from them because they're considered so pristine. This is the HK12 capsule, which is a very accurate recreation of the original from Telefunken. Okay, we also are very aware that this is a tube microphone, so let's talk about tubes and transformers because we love that stuff. It's a 6072 tube, and the transformer, this is what's really cool to me. It's a T14 transformer. But it's not just any transformer. What they did is they found a pristine condition, 1961, a transformer from an original microphone. So they reverse engineered that so it's exact to what was being done in 1961, recreated now fresh and modern. The mic is just absolutely fantastic. It's one of the very top prizes that I have in my entire microphone locker. Now they were singing at the same time, so for Cassie I had to choose something else from my locker, and one of my other favorites is the Neumann M149. It's just one of those very classic but also very modern sounding microphones, and let me explain. So while it has the same capsule as the Neumann U47 and the M49, which we all know and love, those are very esteemed prized model numbers, and this has that same original capsule, a lot of other things about the microphone are very modern. For example, it's transformerless, which brings down the noise floor. Even though it's a tube microphone, it has a very low self noise. It also has quite a selection of polar patterns, whereas the original U47 had just two. This has quite a handful of them, as well as on the back here, we don't just have a high cut filter, we have a lot of different frequencies, a lot of different positions that we can select. So even though it has its roots back in the 50s with the original M49, it's very modern, and when it came out, it actually won the TEC award. It won the Tech Award, which is really cool. Now, both of the vocals were recorded through the 9000 from SSL as the preamplifier, because I wanted that really clean, transformerless thing that piece does, and we were very, very, very happy with it, as I hope you will be as well. Now, enough of me. Let's get to Marc Daniel Nelson breaking down what he did on this stunning mix.
Hello there, Marc Daniel Nelson here. I was asked by our good buddy Joe to go and take a spin on this great song, The Chain. Now, Fleetwood Mac rumors and the song The Chain was a huge part of my upbringing and wanting to become a recording engineer. Ken Calais, who not only engineered, produced it, and mixed it, became a lifelong buddy of mine, and I worked underneath him as his main engineer for the last decade. So I learned quite a cool few tricks to kind of go over in this process. But mainly, it's more focused on the song. And knowing covers are interesting because you either decide to go and do a quote-unquote sound-alike in the vein of, or you do your own arrangement. For this song, it sounds like they stuck with the original arrangement, the original vibe. The singers sounded very close to Stevie and Lindsay, and in general, it just has this very similar sound. But unlike 70s records, we have to kind of make sure that we use certain elements in today's technology, like low end, that is more kind of bigger and more expressive, just because that's where we're at now. So I made a hard decision about that, but I wanted to retain a handful of vibe things from the original. One was the kick drum, one was the reverb, and then the last is the panning. There's a lot of interesting things that happened in this song that traditionally you probably wouldn't want to do now, or instinctively you wouldn't do now. One of them mainly was the panning of the vocals. What it sounds like, it took a stack of 2 tracks with 3 people singing, Stevie, Lindsay, and Christine on the choruses, Stevie and Lindsay on the verses doubled. Normally, if you got those tracks, you'd spread them pretty wide in a stereo configuration. But listening to the original, everything is dead in the middle till the end. And that was a very interesting choice to do that, because you don't have very much options with sounds on the song. You have a kick drum in the verses, dobro and electric on the verses, and then the jamming part. The reason why they sound very different is because they were done in different studios and different times. And a little bit of background on that, which is really cool, is the jam of the choruses and the ending jam was from a song that they tracked in Sausalito called Keep Me There, which was a Christine McVie song. And they ended up taking that and cutting it all up and reworking it when they made back in LA at the Producer's Workshop, which is where they did a lot of overdubs. They tracked the majority of Chain and they mixed the whole album. Now, what you hear in the song, the original song, is on the choruses, the whole band kicks in. It's an organ, guitars, vocals are going. It's a full drum set. But on the verses, it's literally just one kick drum and a dobro electric and mono vocals. So I thought, okay, for this mix, I want to keep something very similar. And Ken and I actually did a bunch of sampling at Producer's Workshop, which is now called the Boulevard, to go after a handful of kind of 70s era drum sounds. And one of those things we got was the kick drum that we went for was the chain sounding kick drum, which I actually ended up just sampling and putting it into this for the verses. And it worked out really good. It gave it its own personality that resembled the familiar part of the original. But when it kicks in, everything else is going. But like the original, unlike a band playing together and a drummer playing on the verses, you would get the overheads, you would get the spot mics, and everything would be a little bigger. Because Mick played it just in a kick drum on the verses, I cut everything out, as you can see, on those verses, other than maybe a couple cymbal crashes and stuff, which were basically overdubs, and then left everything in on the jams. So the kick drum essentially is the chain sounding kick drum on the verses with the actual band jamming, just like in the original. Cool part here is alongside the kick drum, one of the biggest signature parts of this track, in my opinion, was the reverb. And the choice of reverb was, at the time, they only had a plate 140 at Producer's Workshop. He used that to usually mix everything together. In that era, you would basically have one or two reverbs, at the most two, and blend everything, all the instruments together, and use that as your quote-unquote glue, and not use a bunch of compression on your two-bus or anything like that to glue it up. So in the vein, I also used quite a bit of the same reverb along every track. And for the reverb I chose, which was interesting, was kind of a random choice. I ended up using the SSL Flex because I went through and auditioned my favorite plate reverbs and it just wasn't sounding right. The Abbey Road, which was my favorite plate reverb plugin, the UAD, the Sound Toys, the Transatlantic plate, Valhalla plate, they all just had a very kind of larger, big sounding reverb. And if you listen to Rumors, the reverb in that is kind of bright and kind of special sounding. So I had to audition all these different reverbs, and believe it or not, a very random choice, I came across the Flex reverb. I did some adjustment on the diffusion and the reverb time and a little bit of the EQ on the actual reverb itself, and I got it really, really close. So dressing that a little bit on the kick drum, a little bit on the dobro, certainly on the vocals, the snare when the actual band kicks in, it just creates this very kind of familiar sound. But in general, my focus wasn't really supposed to be going after and mimicking 100% of the original. It was more kind of choosing elements that I really liked from the original and adding it to my mix. Before I kick in on what I'm using on every channel and such on this breakdown, I want to just play the intro verse into the chorus and just let us listen to what we have. After that, I can go and kind of dissect each track and show you exactly what I did and why I chose to focus on those elements. Pretty cool. One thing to know, there's a lot of stop and goes on this song, and it was pretty good representation to kind of listen to how that reverb responded to certain hits. If you listen to the mix, and you guys will have the multi-tracks for this too, and you can play around, start listening to those breaks and listen to how different reverbs kind of respond to those breaks. Listening to the original, there's a hit that sounds like a cowbell, but it's not a cowbell, it's just Lindsay hitting the side of the dobro. But with the reflection and the metallic sound of that going into the reverb, it creates this really ethereal kind of spacious reverb. And kind of matching that with the flex, it was actually really cool because it kind of was like, there it is, that's the sound. So sometimes doing those things and finding those little quirky elements is part of the fun about getting this to sound the way it's going to end up being. Before diving in, I just want to lay out a little bit of what we have here. Knowing Joe and how he tracked this, he said he used the SSL 4K and the 9K and the mix Harrison channel strips for the drums. I think the vocals were done on the 9000, the bass was on the 4, and it was all pretty much tracked using that stuff. And listening to the tracks alone sounds pretty great. Knowing Rumors was not recorded on an SSL, you started going, okay, we got to create some sort of personality here, and not to do too much plugging on my own plugins, my personal plugins that I designed. The reason why I'm using quite a bit of those today is because we are going after a specific sound. Now, I made a plugin called the 455, which was the API that was in Sausalito Record Plant that recorded the bridge and the jam and the choruses for this song, as well as pretty much everything else for Rumors. And the other plugin was the Stevens 821, which was the Stevens 24 track that was at Producer's Workshop that recorded not only and mixed the album, but it recorded a lot of the overdubs, and it definitely recorded majority of this intro and the jam of the parts where it's the verses. So using those two elements, it was quite a bit of a sonic character. A lot of the weight, though, goes back into the API EQ. And Ken was saying when they were tracking this, the reason why he used so much API 550 EQ was because when they got to Sausalito, everything just felt very closed down. And being on the substances that they were, he said that they weren't really focusing on like too much kind of a things. And they were just adding quite a bit of that EQ. And knowing that EQ, it's a very kind of personality EQ. So the more you use it, the more it's imparting that sound, which in turn added a lot of personality to the whole album and the sound to that. So I use quite a bit of the 550 style EQ that I have for my plugin on the drums and everything else to create that kind of energy and that sound. So let's go into the drums. Just on the kick drum, I just want to show you for 1 second. I'm going to solo this kick drum. This is the sample that I have. If I pull up this EQ, which is the 450, which is the API style EQ that I have, I'm only using a little bit of the top band. I felt like the kick drum doesn't need that traditional super low end pump, because let's be realistic, it gets a little distracting when you're putting that too much low end in a verse that's just that. So I have the knock of the 10K and I have a little bit of 5K to open it up and just a high pass filter at 30 to cut all the gooey out of it. And it sounds a little bit like this. Now going into the chorus, the whole band kicks in. I'm going to take out all the plugins I have on the snare, because for me, Fleetwood Mac, the snare drum is a giant personality of the band. It's how I got into wanting to record drums as a kid, and it kind of stapled the whole era of snare drums for me. And everyone that knows me really well makes fun of me because I put almost the amount of attention to the snare drum as I do, let's say, the vocal. But for this song, it really needed that kind of attention. If I take everything off of it, and if you see here the drums, this is my bus. All my tracks are flowing down into their own buses, and I'm not doing very much compression or stuff on those buses except for the vocals, and that's just kind of grouping the compression for the vocals. But going back to the snare drum, I took everything off, but if I have the fab filter on, I can show you what I did here. There was an issue with the tone having this whistle, like whoo kind of sound that I wanted to get out of that. The snare didn't necessarily have the body that I wanted out of the traditional sounding Fleetwood Mac snare. So I added the fundamental back in at 130. I took some of that squawk out. I didn't add too much top in or anything because this EQ was mainly there to kind of sculpt it. And then I can add in the other elements. But let's listen to just the snare on its own with nothing on it. I'll put it on it. Right away, you can hear if I go into Delta mode, that weird honkiness. The other thing I'm noticing is on this snare drum, there's quite a lot of attack on the top end. And as cool as that is, in normal modern era, that attack works really well in very dense mixes. But for this song, because there's not a lot in the arrangement, it's kind of sticking through a little too much. So I added a couple other fundamental little things that focus on that along the chain. But right now, focusing on the bottom of the body. And then I'm going to add the EQ, which is quite a bit of that API sound on the top. And changing a little bit of the bias, which is just relaxing the signal a little bit. It's very subtle, but it does help it. And then opening up my 821, which is the plugin that I have for the Stevens 821 tape machine. This tape machine is not made to be super colorful. Didn't have transformers and stuff. It just certainly made things just sounding bigger and just fuller is what I wanted out of that snare drum. So I'm not hitting it terribly hard, but I'm pushing a little harder than normal. And it still does the tape saturation thing really well. So adding that without, and then in, very slight, but adding everything slowly, it gets you way higher and way better. Adding elements like too much crazy compression and stuff that I just felt like it does not need, because I'd like to have this drum sound have a lot more life to it. That's why I don't have a bus compressor on the drum bus or on the stereo bus. The final thing on the snare is this spiff little guy, and I have it in cut mode, and I have a tiny bit of a boost around 6 open, which essentially is focusing on the upper mid-range and the high frequency. And that's going to just tame some of that click. Now without, and then with everything engaged. And let's pull in the bottom, which adds a little bit of that fur too. And again, I have quite a bit of 10K opened up on that too. Now if we open the whole drum set, let's open up the whole set. You can see here, I've got quite a bit of EQ on all of these elements, and then some Stevens 821 tape on the overheads. I did keep the rooms and the crotch because I wanted to keep a little space on the drums, and knowing this era, it's usually just really dead sounding drums. But I wanted to kind of implement a little bit of that air and life to it as well. So here's the drums by itself. Let's take all the plugins out. Put them back in. Focus on the overheads, because the cymbals are actually really well recorded. And that's one thing I really get into kind of a fix when I'm trying to mix a track and the overheads just kind of sound too brittle and harsh. I like the fact that these did not. These were very smooth sounding. So if everything was out, I wanted to kind of create a little bit of some space out of the honky shh sound of it. So just adding a little bit of EQ on that. The tape helps that. Pulls a little bit of that punch out of the snare. And then the soothe. One thing about soothe is I'm focusing on the upper end again, and that's focusing on the shh kind of sound. I have the sensitivity sharpness very kind of high, and I think that usually helps a little better on cymbals and hi-hats and stuff. And I don't know if that's just because of how sharp the frequency is on something metallic, but putting it in a sharpness mode, it kind of tends things a little better. Let's pull in the bass guitar. Now, knowing this song, the bass guitar is a huge part of it. Obviously, it's got one of the most famous bass solos in history. And I wanted to really focus on the tone of it, because when it was recorded really well. Very full frequency. But the issue was, again, trying to go back and having it not so huge sounding, because we didn't want to impart too much of it. We're trying to kind of keep everything tight and punchy. I had to kind of sculpt it away because there was a frequency around 900 to 1200 it's just too squawky, too much squawk kind of for this kind of era. So I put a lot of attention to that. Going down, I did some global stuff here, but going down to the bass bus, I did a little bit here, a tiny bit of compression, and a little bit of the spiff. If I soloed the bass and the drums, I actually boosted 1K here for the personality, and then I took it out later with the fab filter. Put the tape on this as well. That's without. If I go back and I focus on that squawky sound in the bus of the bass, I can show you a little more what I was doing. That sound. So if I didn't take that out, it would sound like this with the drums. See how it's just sitting on top of the drums now? And you go, well, you added 1K at API, but the reason why I did that is because, again, the phase relationship of that EQ has its own very big personality. I wanted to make sure that that is in there as well. And then I can take it out with a little more surgical EQ here. This is with that kind of upper mid-range staying without me scooping it. Now, if I engage this, it just pulls it in and keeps it tighter. I have a little bit of dynamic EQ on that too, because sometimes I want to hear it instead of scooping it all the way out. I have a little bit of it just tapping when it just hits that threshold a little too hard, which blends in pretty well with that snare drum. That squawk is kind of in the same area, so you got to keep them very similar, which is why I put all that attention there. If you haven't heard the snoring, I want to introduce you to my new co-pilot. This is Alfie. Alfie is my new little co-pilot, mixing co-pilot friend, but he is a snoring machine. So if you hear him snoring throughout this whole thing, please excuse him. He only knows one thing, and that is sleeping. Going into that reverb again, if we just play the whole track, you see the dobro, the electric guitars, the organ, and the pump organ-y kind of sounding thing that we have in the beginning. It's all going through the same reverbs, same as the vocals. There's only one reverb in this entire project. And if I go to that one spot that I said sounds like a cowbell hitting, you can actually hear the reverb really sustaining. That's a big personality for the track. Instantly reminds you of that era. It feels familiar, and that's important, even if you're not going after the whole kind of sound of that era 100%. It just kind of fills in the cracks nicely. Let's listen to the dobro. So obviously this is how the song starts. This is a big personality, this in the kick drum. That's what you first hear. This is going into side 2. So it's getting you into this new part of the album, and it's important to kind of focus and showcase that. This track doesn't have a lot on it. In fact, I have the traditional API and the tape machine, and then I'm going in on the acoustic to do a little bit of correction after the fact. But if you see, I'm not putting compression on this. I'm using the tape compression on the 821. slightly to glue it together because I don't need it to be crazy modern. Just like the vocals, as we're going to hear, I'm not making it super modern where everything's kind of up in your face. Everything kind of has life and is moving. So without the tape machine, and without the EQ, again adding a little bit of the top end and a little bit of the tape. I know this sounds like a plug for my plugins, like I said, but really it's not. It has to do with, this is one of my favorite albums of all time. It was a big part of my life working with trying to get these sounds forever and finally being able to get specific pieces of gear like this tape machine that I own that was part of that album. The sidecar, which was portion of the console that was part of that album. It was important to make those sounds, so I had them forever. And they bring it in spades with delivering that personality for sure. Moving down the line, the electric guitars for the rhythm part, not the solo, I just have a little bit of EQ. Again, 10K and taking out some squawk at the bottom end and actually doing quite a bit of the high pass at 120. It's just too full sounding on its own. See how it just sticks out a little too much? If I put it in, body and the punch is still there, but the low woofliness is not. Woofliness? Is that even a woofle? Woofliness? Woofiness. The woofiness is not the same. Going in. Having some fun on this track, I was going around and playing with this kind of pump organ-y sound. And if you listen in the verses, you'll hear it kind of start the track. I take everything out. It's a nice sound. It's a synth sound. It kind of has its own ethereal point. And putting it together with the electric guitar and the kick drum, it just didn't feel like it had enough personality to itself. So sometimes I like to crapify it and kind of de-sonic it and make it its own thing. This really cool Atura plugin that is called the Tape Mellow-Fi really makes things kind of funky sounding. Listening on its own, it's wobbly, it's fluttery, there's some noise and some wear. And then I added the roto speaker just for personality on slow. And then I took quite a bit of that kind of lower mid-range and a little bit of that squawk around 3900. And it's just now just sitting behind things and it's adding a little bit more personality to the track. Before we get into the vocals, I want to kind of just talk for a second about my automation. In this track, we have everything with no like absolute automation going on in the tracks itself. I have clip gain going, and there's a reason I do that is because I like to access stuff very easily. I know there's processes on the people's automation. For me, what works really good is automating the groups and then using clip gain on the tracks itself. You can see that I have quite a bit of clip gain and stuff personality-wise on the vocals. And then once I'm going in the buses, that's where the real automation that I really spend quite a bit of time getting right. And I feel like in a mix, that is 80% of making a mix special is the way the instruments are flowing around each other like waves. Because that's kind of how you're getting glue without compressing, is using quite a bit of automation. And that was pretty much the way you would do it forever before everyone just started squawking and squeezing everything into a compressor. So if you see, I'm automating almost every bus and creating its own pattern, and it's all kind of flowing together. Quite a bit of that is in the vocals. And then going into the vocals, you see here, we have Troy and Cassie, Lindsay and Stevie. What they would have done when they tracked the original at Producer's Workshop for the vocals, they would have stacked the vocals together on one mic. Because if you look at the multi-tracks, there's 2 vocals, but it sounds like there's 6 people on those. Is because what they did was obviously they doubled the track when they had the 3 people sing, then the 3 people sing, and then you get 2 tracks. Normally, you would take, okay, those 2, and then you would spread them. It's just instinctively, I would have done instantly spread them to 6 and 9, and I would have the kick in the center and stuff. But listening to the original, everything's locked in the middle until the end. That's a lot of vocals in the middle just for mono. But there's a reason behind that, and it wasn't instinctive because I've talked to Ken about this. It was basically, it just felt better that the guitars had their own space and that the center was the drum, solo drum, and the vocals. And the vocals were thinned out quite a bit, more than normal, what you would normally do, and keeping it a little more spooky and just a little more ethereal instead of having these big, full, fat vocals. When the last jam kicks in with the solo and stuff, we spread the vocals back out quite a bit wide. Now, the treatment of the vocals, as you see here, I'm not doing anything on their own. I'm creating the buses down here, which in turn, if you see in my buses, I have EQ, I have a color box, which is my MJUC, which is not really doing much compression. It's just adding a tube element, like a thickness, harmonic fatness that I wanted. 2 layers of de-essing just to cut down on some sharp punches, and a little bit of LA2A. And the LA2A is different between the 2 vocalists. I have the old LA2 on the background vocals, which is Cassie's vocals, and then I have the more well-known Teletronics LA2A on Troy's vocal. And both, if you hear, are barely working. I'm not doing a terrible amount of compression. And again, the reason I've done this is because I'm trying to treat these vocals not like a modern thing. I like the fact that the vocals are falling back. So in reality, all I'm really doing is just kind of limiting the peaks more than anything. So you see some of this in the MJUCs. I have a little bit. Again, they're maybe working a dB at the very loudest. I'm just using the boxes as color to kind of create a harmonic fatness to it. And in the vocal EQs, I'm not using the APIs. I'm just doing a very clean, because the way they were recorded on that 9000 channel strip, which is a very kind of clean sound. I want to retain that, but I would roll off way more than normal. Normally I would roll off vocals around 150, but knowing that these vocals are very spooky sounding and back behind things, that okay, how far can we go before it starts sounding too thin? And 300 and 264 is quite a aggressive roll off. And then I'm still taking off kind of that squawk area. But if I put it in with the whole band with just flat EQ, it would sound like this. Listen to the wind blow, watch the sunrise. Totally different presentation because everything else is focused on making things kind of smaller, but yet more present. Going into the last part of this, I have my stereo bus. And in the stereo bus, I have the 455, which is my sidecar, which is in turn the console that they use to do the choruses and the jam. And like I said, the majority of the rest of Rumors. I'm doing a little bit of the EQ on the stereo bus. I'm doing high pass at 40, and I'm adding a little bit of 821 tape. This 821 tape, I put the 456 formula. I put the bias of the low and high up a little bit to make it a little more relaxed and focused. And I took a tiny bit of top end out of it. On the sidecar, there's a little thing called the hammer, and that's in purple. So Ziad, who's Pulsar Modular, and myself, when we were designing this, we were wanting to get a little more center punch. We noticed that by putting it on its own feature up here, we could use it when you need it, and it's not always in line. This song needed a tiny bit because of that jam. It creates a nice punch. So let's listen. Speaking of the jam, let's go from the bass solo into the ending and talk a little bit more about that. If you see here, I am not using a bus compressor, and I'm just using a little bit of Limitless, which is the limiter, the final brick wall limiter. My two favorite these days is the AL1 and the Limitless. The Limitless was pretty good for this track because it retained some of that depth that I really wanted, and I wasn't focusing on making it terribly loud. It just had a nice special sauce to it. But the tape machine itself is doing quite a bit of the heavy lifting as well as the sidecar. So if I play the track, let's play it from the chorus at the end. Let me take those two out. The mix doesn't fall apart, but you're losing personality, obviously, character. Now engaging the sidecar, you're going to get a lot more space between the instruments. And then the tape is like the final lacquer and the final sheen. Something to talk about. This is a fade-out song, and something that Ken taught me years ago was in fade-out songs, what they would do is when things were starting to fade out, they would actually start goosing the drums a little higher as it started fading out, so you could start hearing the last of the fills. Same as the vocals. So if you look here in this area where it starts fading out, everything's starting to slope up a little bit more. And even though you're countering it, you're choosing those elements to just stick out right at the end. And for me, growing up with cassettes, I remember Huey Lewis 4 album, and every song in that album faded out. And I remember even as a kid, like hearing at the last fill, what was the last thing you could hear? Drums seemed to be always the last thing. There was always a fill right before it ended, or like one line before it ended. It wasn't everything ending together. There was always something there. So that's a little cool little trick there too. Now to end this little portion of our mixing breakdown video, I'm going to play it from the bass solo into the last part of the jam, and I'll leave it for you guys to have fun. Please enjoy these multi-tracks. Joe did a very, very great job. All of us at Produce Like a Pro want to thank you guys all, and please happy, happy, happy mixing.